Hello, I am Todd. I am one of the administrators for the Antioch Writers Group. And the Antioch Writers Group is a place where we want people to be able to come together and share their works in progress and to have a positive environment where they can get good feedback, good encouragement on what's working, maybe what's not working so well. And in light of this pandemic, we decided that we would produce some videos for the Antioch Writers Group to have tools and resources to help them in their writing projects. One of the first things that we need to decide as authors is what literary genre we're going to work with. And so we have to decide, are we going to write in fiction? Are we going to write in nonfiction? Are we going to write in a mystery or in science fiction? So if you haven't already found a genre that you want to write in, what we want to do is go over a list of the most common genres in fiction to get a better idea of what genre you would like to write in. In our video today, we are going to look at the different literary genres, what the core components of those are, and a few examples of each one. So let's go ahead and get started. The first literary genre that we're going to deal with today is literary fiction. Literary fiction are written works that have artistic value and literary merit. Some of the key elements in literary fiction are political criticism, social commentary, and reflections on humanity. Literary fiction is typically character-driven as opposed to plot-driven, and the length of the story tends to follow the character's inner story. Examples of literary fiction. Our first example of literary fiction is Breakfast at Tiffany's by Truman Capote. Our second example is Memoirs of a Geisha by Arthur Golden. Our final example of literary fiction is Lord of the Flies by William Golding. Mystery, also known as detective fiction. One of the main elements in detective fiction, or mystery, is that the story follows a detective solving a crime from start to finish. Other elements include dropping clues, slow reveals of information. It turns the reader into a detective trying to solve the case. Mysteries usually start with an exciting hook, and they end with a conclusion that answers all of the reader's questions. Our first example of a mystery novel is And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. Our second example is Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil by John Brent. And our final example of mystery is A Time to Kill by John Grisham. Next up is the literary genre thriller. Thrillers are often dark, mysterious, suspenseful, plot-driven stories. They rarely have comedic elements in them. They keep the readers on their toes. And thrillers use plot twists and cliffhangers to keep the reader interested until the very end. Our first example of a thriller is Along Came a Spider by James Patterson. Our second example is Angels and Demons by Dan Brown. And our third example is Jurassic Park by Michael Crichton. The next genre is horror. Horror books are designed to scare, startle, shock, and repulse the readers. Horror stories tend to focus on themes of death, demons, evil spirits, and the afterlife. Horror stories often prey on our fears with ghosts, vampires, werewolves, and other monsters. Plots and characters in horror stories are used to create a sense of dread in the reader. The first example of a horror story that we have is Dracula by Bram Stoker. The second horror story example is Misery by Stephen King. And the final horror story example is I Am Legend and Other Stories by Richard Matheson. Historical fiction takes place in a historical setting and often uses real historical characters. It is written with a careful balance between fictional elements and real history. These stories tend to transport the reader to another time and another place. These areas can be real, imagined, or both. Our first example of historical fiction is A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. Our second example is I, Claudius by Robert Graves. And our third example is Schindler's List by Thomas Keneally. Our next literary genre is romance. Romance normally centers around relationships between two people. Most romances are lighthearted, optimistic, and are emotionally satisfying in the end. Romances will contain conflict, but it does not overshadow the relationship element. Our first example of the romance genre is A Walk to Remember by Nicholas Sparks. Our second example is Bridget Jones' Diary by Helen Felding. And our final example is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. Our final genre in this video is Western. Westerns are about cowboys, settlers, and outlaws exploring the Western frontier and taming the American Old West. The golden age of Western novels corresponds with the golden age of Western movies in the decades of the 1940s, the 1950s, and the 1960s. Our first example in the Western genre is Little House on the Prairie by Laura Ingalls Wilder. Our second example is True Grit by Charles Portis. And our final example is Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy. Well, that's it for the literary genres in today's video. Be sure and check my next video for more literary genres that you might want to write in. Once again, this is Todd, one of the administrators for the Antioch Writers Group, and I would like to thank you for watching this video. For more writing-related videos and other Antioch Library programs, please click the subscribe button.